Hey folks, let's take a look at some good old Marvel Bronze Age horror comics. I'm going to show you the run of Werewolf by Night from the 70s. That character actually started in Marvel Spotlight in 1971, shortly after the code was made more lenient, thanks to Stan Lee and his Spider-Man drug issues. But anyway, this character is named Jack Russell. I know, the werewolf dog Jack Russell, but still, let's not hold that against it. It's a great character. Great character. Mike Plug artwork, classic. And the Marvel Spotlight #2, like I said, came out in 1971. And this character ran for a couple of issues after that in that title. If you want to see the video that I did on Marvel Spotlight, you can check that out. And then in 72, he was so popular that he got his own series. And this is my off-the-rack copy of #1. And I was old enough then to start taking care of my books, and this one survived pretty well. It's got a color-breaking crease right here at the top, and a couple of stress marks on the spine. Fashionable to call those ticks these days. Anyway, I think it's probably in very fine minus. I mean, I'm happy with it. As long as a comic is around the very fine range, hey, I'm good with it. I don't need to spend a lot of money on 9.4s and 9.6s and all that. Of course, if you do that, that's cool. That's your prerogative, but it's just not my way. All right, this issue cover, of course, is by the great Mike Plug. The interior art by Plug, and the story is by Jerry Conway. And let me show you one thing here. Just a quick aside, the way I store my comics, I keep them in these thin Mylar bags, and I double bag most of them because, for one thing, it saves on Mylar, it saves on space, and it's actually better for the comic books to have one turned one way and the one behind it turned the other way. It supports the spines a little bit better. So, that's the way I do it. And the more expensive issues, or the ones that are worth more to me because of sentimental value or whatever, like this #1 here, I keep those in an additional thick Mylar snug, and I've cut off the tops of the snug so they fit down in my comic boxes. And I keep them in acid-free boxes out of the light. And now, if you don't seal the tops of the bags, which you can, of course, with these thin Mylar bags, then you get airflow. If you just keep them in snugs, you get airflow. And over the years, that will age your comics. I've seen, videos and pictures of books that were stored naked in snugs, open at the top, and the tops of them are yellowed. So, if you cut off the airflow, you're a lot better off in the long run. And I keep mine out of the light. That's a big thing. I know a lot of people like to display their books, like in slabs and up on the wall and stuff. And if that's your thing, go for it, But I like to keep my comics and monster mags, that newsprint. I like to keep that in the dark until I'm ready to look at it or do a video or whatever. So moving along. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you just another danger of just storing them in these thick Mylar snugs, those things will cut you, man. Cuts like a knife, as the song says. And they can cut your books if you're not real careful. So, but you've got the thin Mylar. These are 1 mil Mylar, 1 mil. I got these from Bill Cole years and years ago before they became so expensive and hard to get. I'm not even sure they have the 1 mil anymore at Bill Cole's. They might at Gerber's, but not real sure. But anyway, I've got more than enough to do for my collection, so I'm not worried about buying any more. But these things are pliable. They protect the book really well with a good acid-free backing board, and they will not damage your book. It's just as safe as poly bags, and you never have to change these things out. Okay, that's enough of that. If you do it differently, that's fine. You know, I'm just telling you how I do it. Let's go to number 2, so this video doesn't last forever. The cover is by Mike Plug. Interior art by Mike Plug and Frank Chiaramonte. Story by Jerry Conway. And see, I've double bagged most of these. And you can see the little label on the back. I use those little labels. If you use tape on Mylar, it sticks too much and it's hard to undo. If you use these little labels like this, it's a lot better. It comes loose really easily, but yet it holds the flap down. So that's the way I do it. Number 3 there, that cool cover is by Mike Plug. Interior art by Plug and Chiaramonte. Story by Jerry Conway. Number 4. Yeah, that's a great story, by the way. Cover by Plug. Interior art, Mike Plug. Frank Bowl on the inks. And story by Jerry Conway. Number 5. Cover by Plug. Art by Plug. Story Len Wein. Good writers on this series. Number 6. Cover by Mike Plug, art by Mike Plug and Frank Bowl, story by Len Wein. Number 7. Cover by Mike Plug, interior art, Mike Plug, Jim Mooney on the inks, and story by Len Wein. Number 8. Cover by Mike Plug, interior art, Werner Roth, with inks by Paul Reinman. And story by Len Wein. They were really on a roll with the Plug early on. Number 9, that cover is by Tom Sutton. One of those interesting covers where half of it is like under the ground, you know, and you got something reaching up and dragging under whatever's on top or menacing it in some manner. That's kind of a trope too. You see a few covers like that. At number 9 there, Tom Sutton and Frank Giacoia did that cover. Interior art, Tom Sutton. Story, Jerry Conway. And Tom Sutton is, you know, was a good artist, really good artist. He's one of my favorites. Sadly to say, I mean, this is no slight on Sutton. He's no Plug, but nobody else hardly is. Plug is in the upper echelon for sure. That's just my opinion. Here's number 10. Cover by Tom Sutton. Interior art, Tom Sutton. Story, Jerry Conway. Number 11. Cover, Gil Kane. And there'll be no Gil Kane nose jokes in this video. Gil Kane did the pencils. John Romita did the inks. Interior art, Gil Kane and Tom Sutton. Story by Marv Wolfman. Wolfman was another great writer. I mean, he took Tomb of Dracula to great heights. Number 12. There's some confusion on the Grand Comics database about who actually did this cover. They've got maybe Romita, maybe John Romita, maybe Ron Wilson, maybe Ernie Chan, maybe Alfredo Alcala, and they're not really sure who did the pencils and the inks. I mean, I see Romita in that thing. But here's another trope where a monster's sitting in the back seat of a car and you see it through the rear view mirror there. And that story is by Marv Wolfman. Number 13. Now we're back to some Mike Plug goodness. This is the first appearance of Topaz. She was a big-time character in that series. Cover, of course, Mike Plug. Interior art, Mike Plug, Frank Chiaramonte. Story by Marv Wolfman. Yes, Marv Wolfman is doing Werewolf by Night. I know. Sure worked out, though. And here is number 14. Cover by Plug. And interior art, Plug and Chiaramonte. Story by Marv Wolfman. And that is actually continued in Tomb of Dracula number 18. Marvel was knocking it out of the park back in the day with the bronze horror. Here's number 15, cover by Mike Plug. There's the classic cover, the face-off with Dracula. Gothic horror just drips out of that. That's continued in Tomb of Dracula 19. And that cover is by Mike Plug. Interior art, Plug and Chiaramonte. Story, Marv Wolfman. Number 16, cover by Mike Plug with John Romita alterations. Yeah, they like to get Romita redoing faces a lot of times. I think Stan Lee wanted to keep the Marvel characters look a little bit more consistent, and when he felt it was a little bit over stylized, he'd bring Johnny R in to clean things up and make it look uniform. And the interior art by Mike Plug and Frank Chiaramonte. The story by Mike Friedrich. Number 17. Yeah, that screams Gil Kane. That cover is by Gil Kane with inks by Frank Giacoia. Interior art, Don Perlin. This is the first Perlin issue, and he pretty much took over after that on the title. Story is by Mike Friedrich. And he turned in adequate work, but considering what we had prior with Plug and Sutton, Don Perlin was, I guess you'd just say mediocre, really. He was a jobber, but they kept the title going. It was still a great title. It just didn't have that spectacular artwork. That number 18 there, that cover is by Ron Wilson, Frank Giacoia. And interior art, Don Perlin and Mike Royer. Story by Mike Friedrich. And we've got number 19. And no, that's not Dracula. Those are just vampires. That is actually continued in Giant-Sized Creatures, number 1, which I'll show later in this video. But that cover there is Gil Kane, of course. Tom Palmer on the inks. Palmer was fantastic. He was an all-star. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Yeah, there's a team for you. Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. I won't say anymore. Story by Mike Friedrich. And I don't mean to ruffle any feathers. I'm just giving my honest opinion on this stuff. I think all of it's fantastic. I love all of it. This whole title is big fun. So I'm a huge fan. So I'm not disparaging anybody. It's just that there are levels of skill and levels of how much I appreciate certain, artists and writers. This number 20 here is continued from Giant-Sized Creatures. This cover is by Gil Kane and Mike Esposito. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Story by Doug Minch. Yeah, Minch was a good writer. Marvel had a good bullpen up in the 70s. Okay, number 21. Cover by Gil Kane and Frank Giacoia. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Story, Doug Minch. 22, cover, Gil Kane and Dan Adkins. Adkins was a good inker. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Story, Doug Minch. And here's number 23, cover by Ron Wilson. And either Mike Esposito or Frank Giacoia is thought to have done the inks on that cover. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Story, Doug Minch. If I sound deflated when I give some of the credits for some of these issues, don't take it to heart. All of these are worth having. This is a fantastic series, so if you can, get it. Wonderful reads. If nothing else, get the reprints. Read the stories. Here's number 24, cover by Gil Kane and Al Milgrom. Interior art, Don Perlin and Vince Coletta. Story by Doug Minch. There's number 25, cover by Gil Kane and Mike Esposito, interior art Don Perlin, story Doug Minch. Number 26. Now this one is continued in Giant Size Werewolf number 3, and I'll be showing that later too. This cover is by Gil Kane and Klaus Janson, and I really like Klaus Janson's inks. He did great stuff on Defenders with Sal Buscema. And yeah, I say Buscema instead of Buscema, so, sue me. Okay, this interior art's by Don Perlin, story by Doug Minch. Number 27, this is continued from Giant Size Werewolf number 3. So there was a lot of crossovers, and continuity here with the Giant Size title. This cover is by Gil Kane and Tom Palmer, and that's a wonderful looking monster. Is that Lovecraftian or what? Interior art Don Perlin, story Doug Minch. And here is number 28. This is where Jack Russell's sister Lisa becomes a werewolf. And this cover is by Gil Kane and Frank Giacoia, interior art Don Perlin, story by Doug Minch. There's his sister he's getting ready to go up against. This is number 29, cover by Gil Kane and Klaus Janson, interior art Don Perlin, story by Doug Minch. Here's number 30. This cover is by Gil Kane, and there's some question about the inker. They think it's probably Romita. Looks like Romita might have messed around with the werewolf's face there. Oh yeah, before I go any further, the framing pieces. Yeah, you got Jack Russell up here lurking in the corner of my Marvel Legends Monsters box. And here is Lon Chaney Jr., who's a Universal monster, who snuck in to mug for the camera, and there is Monsters Unleashed number 1. I did a video on Monsters Unleashed if you want to check that out sometime. Anyway, back to this. Here's number 31, cover by Gil Kane, Frank Giacoia. Interior art Don Perlin. Story by Doug Minch, but he and Don Perlin co-plotted this. So Don Perlin actually had, some serious input into this book, and I certainly don't want to belittle his contribution, because he did some good things here. Let's just leave it at that. All right, here's number 32, the first Moon Knight. This is all the rage, was all the rage with speculators. Of course, the show seems to be ill-received. Fickle, fickle, fickle. And I guess prices are down. I don't know. I don't keep up with spec. I bought this for $2 back in the around 1980, probably, out of a dealer's long box. Now, I got most of these from bargain boxes and then upgraded them later from long boxes. And a lot of the newer ones past this 32 I bought off the rack. So I love the books for what they are, The artwork, the story. I'm not big into spec and investment. I'm not stupid. I mean, I'm aware of value, but I'm not going to sell anything like that. Even back when it'll go in cycles, it'll go back up again, and then it'll go back down, the way it always does. And, I'm keeping it because it has sentimental value. It's part of my original run, man. It's not going anywhere. Okay, of course, cover by Gil Kane. It's a great cover, really is. And inks by Al Milgrom. And Milgrom did a fantastic job there, better than usual for him. Interior art, Don Perlin and Howie Perlin. And story by Doug Minch. Now, I keep that one in a snug as well. So that's the reason it's single bagged. Here's number 33. The cover is by Gil Kane and Klaus Janson. And if, in case I wasn't clear, I've got the big snugs, the Golden Age snugs, and the whole thing. That, I fit the whole thing in there when I keep them in snugs, and that way it's doubly protected with the thick mylar and the bag and board. So anyway, here's number 33. This cover is by Gil Kane and Klaus Janson. Interior art Don Perlin, Howie Perlin, and story by Doug Minch. Here's number 34. This cover is by Gil Kane and Tom Palmer. You can always tell Palmer's inks. I mean, just beautiful. It kind of looks like a frosty cold morning mist he's got over everything. It just, I love the texture and sheen that he puts on pencils, with his inks. Interior art Don Perlin, story Doug Minch. Here's number 35. Now, this is actually a Jim Starlin cover, and it has Bernie Wrightson inks. Those guys were buddies back in the day, and, they worked together quite a bit, and that's just awesome, I mean, can't get much better than Starlin and Wrightson. Interior art Don Perlin, and story by Doug Minch. Here's number 36. This cover is by Don Perlin. Interior art Don Perlin. Story by Doug Minch. Now let's get to this. This number 37, that's not really Moon Knight in that issue. That is a magical construct created by this dude, Dr. Glitter Knight. And he created like 3 magical constructs to battle the werewolf in that issue. So these guys that are specking on it for the Moon Knight appearance, yeah, it's the image of Moon Knight if you want to go that far with it. But in the story, it's not really Moon Knight. Of course, I don't think story matters a whole lot to most spec anyway. This cover is by Ed Hannigan and Dan Adkins. And it almost looks like that Wrightson kind of tipped a brush there. Adkins really did a great job with that. And interior art Don Perlin, story by Doug Minch. And we've got number 38, cover Don Perlin, interior art Don Perlin, story Doug Minch. Number 39, got a guest appearance by Brother Voodoo. Cover Rich Buckler and Keith Pollard, or Pollard, depending on exactly how you pronounce that. Interior art Don Perlin, story by Doug Minch. Number 40. Now this cover, they're kind of confused here. They don't really know, but it's either Hannigan or Pollard. But the inks are Tom Palmer. And that's fairly evident. You can tell Palmer's style there. It's a great cover though. Interior art Don Perlin, and story by Doug Minch. Number 41. Yeah, they started kind of losing their way toward the end here, I think, especially when Iron Man showed up, but we'll get to that in a second. This number 41 here is, the cover is by Pablo Marcos and Steve Lealoha. Excuse me. My tongue wouldn't quit moving. Interior art Don Perlin, story Doug Minch. Now we've got... I guess sales were sagging at this point, and they decided to inject a little Iron Man, And when that happens toward the end of a series, I mean, you can tell the end is nigh. Cover by Dave Cockrum. Interior art Don Perlin, and story by Doug Minch. And here then is the last issue of the run, number 43. Cover by Ernie Chan. Interior art Don Perlin. Story by Doug Minch. And I specifically remember buying that one off the rack, and I'm sure I bought several of the ones prior to that off the rack. And I remember thinking, boy, compared to the glory days, which I had read, you know, the early issues from purchases and back bins and, you know, and bargain bins and stuff, used bookstores and flea markets. And they were great. I mean, they were classics, fabulous, Plug art, awesome stories. But by now, the things had gotten a little weak, and that Trianiman is, I'm not going to say any more about that. But anyway, this is the last issue, so that tells you something. Number 43 there is, you know, Ernie Chan on the cover, Don Perlin on the art, Doug Minch on the story. And we've got giant-sized creatures. This came out in 1974. And, you know, this introduces Greer Nelson, who was formerly the Cat, as Tigra. Some people call it Tigra. It just always seemed like it should be Tigra to me, but if you call it Tigra, enjoy yourself. The second story in here is by Reed Crandall and Lynn Wein. And this cover is by Ron Wilson, Frank Giacoia. Interior art, Don Perlin, Vince Coletta, and story by Tony Isabella. These Marvel Giant Size issues were absolutely great. Now, the 35-cent ones, there were 4 of those. That's when they first came out with them in 1974. 4 different of the titles were 35 cents, and they quickly went up to 50 cents, as you see there. It's still a great bargain, though. This number 2 here is covered by Gil Kane and Tom Palmer, and that's beautiful, you know. Got Jack Russell hanging all over the Marvel Frankenstein monster. They're going at it, man. Interior art, Don Perlin, Vince Coletta. Story Doug Minch, and it had a bunch of reprints in the back that don't need to go into right now. This number 3, cover by Gil Kane and Tom Palmer. Very nice. Interior art, Don Perlin and Sal Trapani. And story by Doug Minch. And there were reprints in that one as well. Now Morbius makes the scene here. It's number 4, cover by Gil Kane and either Dan Adkins or Mike Esposito. Interior art, Virgil Redondo. And story by Doug Minch. That's a 20-pager. And then there's another 20-page story with art by Young Montano and story by Doug Minch. And it has a Russ Heath reprint from 1951 called Return of the Brain. Talk about getting your money's worth. Man, that's some good stuff. Here's number 5. This cover is by Gil Kane, of course, and Tom Palmer on the inks. Interior art, Young Montano. Story, Doug Minch. 36-page story. And it had reprints from the 50s. So there you have it. That is the run of Werewolf by Night, 1 through 43, as well as Giant Size Creatures number 1, and then the title that it turned into, Giant Size Werewolf 2 through 5. Hope you guys dug that, and I'll be back with more stuff later, probably monster-oriented, maybe dinosaurs. See ya.